What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to a new edition of the Wraparound, brought to you each and every Monday and Thursday by the Hockey News. I am your host, Emma Lingan, and I am the Nashville Predators site editor and reporter here at the Hockey News. I'm joined, of course, by my wonderful co-host, Michael Augello, who is our Buffalo Sabres editor and reporter here at the Hockey News. And as always, we have a lot to talk about today. And before we do dive into today's bite-sized storylines from around the NHL, do want to let you know that we are brought to you by our good friends at Sticks.com. Hey, hockey players, why drop a fortune on your sticks when you can snag pro-level composite sticks at Sticks.com? That's Stix.com. These all black beauties are made for sniping, saucing, and shutting it down, all while looking sharp on the ice. And the best part is that prices start at just $85.13 US for a 3-pack. Yep, you heard that right. Elite sticks without the elite price. Hit up Stix.com. Again, that's Stix.com now and gear up without the markup. Let's go. Michael, some rough injury news for the Edmonton Oilers this week. That's where we're going to start. Connor McDavid sustained a lower body injury during the second period of the Oilers' 4-3 overtime loss to the Winnipeg Jets, and Leon Draisaitl sustained an undisclosed injury during a 7-1 win over Utah Hockey Club. So there is no clear timeline for the return for either one of these guys, but they aren't expected to be out, either one of them, for more than about a week. So with looking at, obviously, those are the second and fourth leading scorers in the NHL, obviously Edmonton's top players. But with how well the LA Kings have been playing, should the Oilers be concerned that even if they're only without these guys for a couple games, should they be concerned that they'll be overtaken for second place in the Pacific Division while they're missing those guys?
The LA Kings' only chance of beating Edmonton in the playoffs is to get home ice advantage. Right now, they're tied with 87 points. The Kings' record at home is a ridiculous 25-3-4. They're under 500 on the road. So if you ask me, if I look at it objectively, they have to get home ice advantage to have a chance. Now, these were not catastrophic injuries, but we know that everything runs through McDavid and Draisaitl. It's funny. I saw the video of McDavid getting hurt, and it didn't look like a lower body. It almost looked like he hurt his wrist or it was something on his arm. So I don't know if there's a little playoff chicanery going on here. Oh, it's lower body, and maybe it's upper body. Who knows? But if it was a season-ending injury, you could write off Edmonton completely. But if you look at that race for 2-3 again. The Central, that race is ridiculous with Dallas and Colorado. You don't know who's going to end up second and third in the Atlantic. Fourth year in a row, these two teams facing each other. I'm sure the bitterness has risen in LA to hopefully beat the Oilers. But the only chance that they have is to get home ice advantage. And for their sakes, I'm sure they're hoping that McDavid and Draisaitl are not 100% when the middle of April rolls around.
Definitely. We know that McDavid was dealing with some injuries during the playoffs last year as well, so could just be an abundance of caution by the Oilers here as they do get ready to gear up for another playoff push. Earlier this week, Emily Kaplan from ESPN reported that Dan Friedkin, an American billionaire, has emerged as a strong ownership option to bring the NHL to Houston. So this is not the first time that we've heard Houston in the mix for a potential expansion franchise. But now that this potential option looks like pretty sustainable and seems like it has a little bit more weight to it, do you think Houston seems like the next best spot for the NHL to expand? And if not, where do you think they should go instead?
Well, you look at the names and the cities that have sort of popped out from people like Kevin Weeks and Emily Kaplan, as you mentioned. Elliot Friedman has mentioned particular cities. It's been Houston. It's been Atlanta. To a lesser extent, I think everybody has PTSD about Phoenix, but you know that the NHL is going to want to go back there. And the reason for all three of those is because they're top 10 U.S. television markets. And the NHL looks at the situation of, they have 7 Canadian cities, and that really doesn't register when it comes to the NHL U.S. television contract. They're separate contracts. They need bigger cities with big ratings to drive, getting bigger money on new television deals. Houston's name has been out there for a while. It had been connected with Tillman Fertitta, who is the owner of the Houston Rockets. But apparently, according to Elliot Friedman, he sort of balked at the $650 million expansion fee that Seattle paid. Now it sounds like, based on what Friedman says, they're looking close to $2 billion, which, I mean, I have that in my pocket for spare change, so no problem for me. But I mean, my goodness, I mean, let's just say this: if they expand, which I don't think is going to happen until after the collective bargaining agreement is ironed out, Houston and Atlanta are probably 1-2. I don't know which one will be first. It's whoever has their building in order, whoever has, the most stable ownership. But I think one of those, and I'm against Atlanta for the third time, Emma, because I just think they've had an opportunity. They've tried it twice. It hasn't worked there. I know people who live in Atlanta. It's a sports town that, they're sort of blasé about the Falcons, blasé about the Braves, even though they're pretty decent organizations. So I don't know if it's a winning formula there, but they're going to go back there because the ratings are big.
Yeah, the size of those markets, Atlanta, as you mentioned, makes it almost irresponsible for them not to try to go back again. But I agree, there's certainly cause for reservations about it going back a third time. Obviously didn't work the first 2 times. A lot of people have blamed that on ownership. So I think that getting the right ownership in place for an Atlanta team would be crucial. But then again, Houston makes a lot of sense, I think, geographically and just in terms of the size of the media market, like you mentioned. I think it would make a ton of sense to have a team in Houston. We've also heard some others recently. New Orleans popped up a few weeks ago. Not sure we're going to be seeing that one anytime soon, but I definitely think that Houston and Atlanta, I would have to agree, are probably 1 and 2 on the list.
Yeah, I'll just say this. The New Orleans thing was hilarious. There was no hockey history in New Orleans. I mean, at least with Houston, you had the Arrows of the WHA. In Atlanta, you had the Flames, you had the Thrashers. You could even make a case, and we know that this is the case. They will not go back to Arizona with Alex Morello as the owner. They will go back there when the ownership is stable. If it's the current owner, Matt Ishbia of the Phoenix Suns, that might be something because they may want to build a new building in downtown Phoenix, and that would be a winning formula. I think the league in the very near future, and I think this is a little overzealous, but they're going to expand to 36 teams, and then you have to start wondering whether they're going to be spreading out the number of players, and how many goaltenders can you'll be pulling them from the KHL and the SHL in Germany. But they see dollar signs, and that's all that matters.
Very true. All right. Well, going to shift over to St. Louis here because Pavel Buchnevich has been out of the lineup with an illness for the last couple of games. So the Blues did call up one of their top prospects, Dalibor Dvorsky, from the AHL this week. He made his NHL debut with the Blues on Sunday against the Nashville Predators. He's got 20 goals, 47 points in 53 games with Springfield in the AHL this year. He's also had 5 goals and 9 points in 5 World Junior games with Slovakia. So big year for Dvorsky. Looking at, obviously, he didn't do much in his NHL debut. I think played about 10 minutes and didn't record a shot on goal. But do you think that this is a guy, when the Blues are looking for a second line center to play behind Robert Thomas, And with the way they're currently sort of going about things in this retool, draft and develop mode, do you think that Dvorsky is a guy that could be a regular player for them as soon as next season?
I think it would be pushing it. He's 19 years old. Now, he's had plenty of international experience, like Maxim Sturback, the Sabres second-round pick from a couple years ago. He played in 4 World Juniors. So, that's pretty impressive. So he started off as a 16-year-old playing in the World Juniors. And he's had a very good year in the American Hockey League. He's definitely one of those who's benefited from the fact that a European first-round pick can go right into the American Hockey League at 18, as opposed to these unfortunate kids in the CHL who, can't go in there until they're 20. And I think that's that agreement with the CHL that I think hinders some players. He's a good young player. But I think it would be pushing it to say he could be the number 2 center or be an everyday player, even playing on the wing. Now, that's not the case with Jimmy Snuggerud, who we talked about as one of the Hobey Baker finalists. He's having another great year at Minnesota. I think as soon as Minnesota either wins the tournament or is eliminated from the tournament, he's going to get signed by the Blues. And based on the fact that they're in a playoff race right now, I wouldn't be surprised if Jimmy Snuggerud steps right into the Blues lineup.
Well, you mentioned Blues are in a playoff race right now, and they have gotten hot at the right time. They've rattled off 6 wins in a row. They've got a 4-point lead on the Calgary Flames for the second wild card spot in the West, but the Flames do still have 3 games in hand. So even if the Blues don't make it to the postseason, because they're not guaranteed a spot right now, do you think Doug Armstrong made the right decision with this team this year and at the trade deadline by not selling off major roster pieces and giving this group a chance to compete? Because this is a group that we've talked about quite a bit already this season as kind of like, all right, what are they doing? Are they trying to contend now, or are they trying to rebuild? And do you think that Armstrong made the right decision here?
Well, I mean, you see the Blues much more than I do, but Doug Armstrong is always in sort of reset, rebuild, retool mode. I mean, it wasn't just Buchnevich. It was also Parayko. It was also Braden Shen, whose names were out there at the deadline, and he didn't move any of them. And I think the only reason that he didn't move them is because he didn't get what he thought they were worth. I cited before that he traded Paul Stastny back in the day to Winnipeg when the Blues were in a playoff spot. So I don't think he hesitates. It depends on what the return is. And all those players, what do they have in common? They're all in their 30s. They all have term on their contracts. I think it's a possibility Braden Shen gets moved in the summer because he had a full no trade this year, and he has a 15-team no trade on July 1st. So you could see him moved because he's in his, 30, I think he's 33, 34 years old, and he's got 3 years left in the contract, and better to move him a year early than a year late. So, I mean, Emma, what do you think of this situation? Because I think the Blues, they're borderline to make the playoffs, and I don't know if they're going to go very far, but they're always in this sort of situation where they're thinking about moving players out.
Yeah, the Blues are interesting because they're sort of in this kind of, like you said, the mushy middle in the Central Division, and they're not tanking. They're not going all the way down to the bottom with Chicago, but they're also not competing really with the big guns. Yes, they are in a playoff spot right now, but like you said, I don't see them going very far. I think they have gotten hot at the right time. But looking at this team, long term, I do think it would be in their best interest to, like you said, maybe move on from Braden Shen, get the value from him that you can, while it's at its highest. So I think that they're an interesting team. They're very stingy defensively, but they're not a high octane offense really. So scoring obviously is even bigger now in today's game than it ever has been. So I think that, they need a little bit more scoring in their lineup to really make some noise, especially in that juggernaut of a Central Division. So Yeah, they still kind of seem stuck in the middle right now, but if they do make the playoffs this year, I think that's house money for them, but I don't think that it should really alter their plans, their organizational plans moving forward, whatever it might be. Speaking of the Blues, former Blue Pat Maroon announced this week that he is going to be retiring after this season. He is 36 years old. He has played in 14 seasons. He's won 3 consecutive Stanley Cups, obviously 1 with the Blues and 2 with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Looking back at his career, Michael, how do you remember Pat Maroon? Where do you, is it with the Blues? Is it with the Lightning? Is it just as a journeyman? How do you kind of assess his career overall?
I'm sure many opponents are shedding a tear at the news that Patrick Maroon is retiring. I would say that my opinion of him is that he was a pain in the rump to play against if you were a player playing the Blues or Tampa. And that I remember him from that 4 years where he made the Stanley Cup final every year and won 3 in a row. He was a big part of that Blues team in 2019. Then he goes to Tampa and wins 2 straight cups and goes to a third final when they lost. He's never been a big scorer. He had 1 good year in Edmonton where he scored 27 goals. And then the rest of the time, he's more of a third, fourth line and not pest because he's too big to be a pest. He always, he never hesitated to rub somebody against the boards or throw a hit or get down and dirty when it was necessary. And, in this league, that's what it takes to win. And I think the players that played with him would consider him a teammate, a valuable teammate. And, now he's got 3 cup rings and he's going to retire. And I'm sure he's going to be very happy flashing those 3 rings every once in a while when he gets together with his buddies.
Yeah, definitely. Not a high skill guy, I don't think, but like you said, a third or fourth line bruiser, not going to be winning any awards necessarily, but I think definitely like you said, you need guys like that, especially on playoff teams that are looking to go the distance. You need tough, durable guys like that in your bottom 6. And so he's, like you said, beloved among his teammates. And I'm sure that, he's got plenty to be proud about from his career. But speaking of, maybe the opposite kind of player, definitely a high skill guy who will be winning several awards before his career's over, Quinn Hughes in Vancouver. So he became the 7th fastest defenseman to reach 400 career points on Saturday. He did it in just 421 games. He is also only 10 points back from Alex Edler in the franchise lead for scoring among defensemen in Vancouver. So keep in mind now, Quinn Hughes is only 25 years old. So by the time that his career is done, where do you see him ranking among, all-time Canucks players, regardless of position?
Well, I think it's going to be dependent on his contract situation because he has 2 more years and then he's a free agent. If he stays past those 2 years, I think he could be the greatest Canuck of all time. But, I'm sure the allure of going to play with his 2 brothers in New Jersey 2 years down the road is something that is high on his mind. Now, I look at and I think back in Canucks history, I think clearly he is, I think probably the best Canucks defenseman of all time. But, you have to contend with the Sedins and Pavel Bure and Marcus Naslund. And if you want to go back a previous generation, the Thomas Gradines or Stan Smeals of the early 80s. Those he has to go a little further to supplant them amongst the all-time greats of the Vancouver Canucks. And I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody. But he's a fantastic defenseman. He's going to win Norris trophies. He may win multiple Norris trophies. That's how good he is. But I think for him to be on the Mount Olympus of Vancouver, he's going to probably have to be there longer than 2 more years.
All right. Well, sticking in Vancouver here, Ian McIntyre from Sportsnet reported that the Canucks have told head coach Rick Tocchet that they are interested in extending his contract with the team. Tockett's got 1 year left on his contract, so it's a club option for next season. So neither he nor management want him coaching next season on an expiring contract. So for him to take on or for the club to pick up that option, it would likely have to come with an extension agreement that lasts beyond next year. So looking at that, Tocchet said he would rather wait until the end of the season to discuss contract negotiations. Not at all unusual for coaches to do that, especially for a team like the Canucks that are looking to make a playoff run. Do you think, though, obviously, once all's said and done, once the Canucks are out of the playoffs and he can actually focus on these contract negotiations, do you think that Tocchet will stay with the Canucks beyond this year?
If I had to take an educated guess, I would say no. I don't know whether he wants. Now, you could say that the situation has been remedied by the trade of JT Miller to the Rangers, but everything that went on this year with Miller and Elias Pettersson and how the season got derailed because of that. I mean, it could be a situation where he just doesn't want to deal with that. There's a lot of talent there. Pettersson is locked up for 7 more years. We just talked about Hughes and how many years he has left. And that team, has some improving to do in certain situations. It may be something where, Tocchet sees other opportunities in other places where he has been before in his career. Remember, he played a significant portion of his career in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh. We know Mike Sullivan, if, the Pittsburgh Penguins keep losing, Mike Sullivan could be a coaching free agent. We know that John Tortorella's act in Philadelphia may be getting a little old. So there are opportunities, and I'm sure there are a few other ones out there for Tocchet, and he may want to be a free agent at the right time to pick off one of these, pretty good jobs.
Yeah, I will throw in Nashville as a team that could be looking for a new coach after this year as well. And like you said, if you're Tocchet, there have been no shortage of distractions this year. The Miller and Pettersson drama, I would even argue that maybe that hasn't been remedied by the Miller trade because Pettersson's seen a drop in production this year, and there's still trade rumors around him, not obviously this year, but maybe into the summer and into next year. So he would have every reason, I think, to want to pursue other opportunities, especially, he's the reigning Jack Adams Award winner. I mean, strike while the iron's hot. And there's certainly going to be a market there for his services if he does want to go elsewhere. So I think that it will bear watching for sure. Here's an interesting one. Former NHL player Josh Leivo has just set the KHL record for goals in a single season. So he has 49 goals in 62 games. So Leivo, if the name sounds familiar, it's because he was drafted 86 overall by the Maple Leafs back in 2011. He spent 10 seasons in the NHL. He played with Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Carolina, St. Louis. He's 31 years old. He signed a 2-year extension to stay with his KHL club back in February, but given, this record-breaking season he's had, do you think that we ever see him back in the NHL? As for his 10-year career in the NHL, he had 93 points in 265 games. So do you think that we ever see him back here?
I think the book on Josh Leivo has been written. I'm very familiar with him because I covered the Toronto Marlies for a number of years when he was there. There was always this, the Leafs have to give this guy an opportunity. And every time they gave him an opportunity, he didn't really seize on it. I mean, he had 1 year where he, I think, had 10 points in 13 games. But his skill set was that of a top 6 forward, but he didn't have the speed to be a top 6 forward. And he didn't have the, sort of the chops to be a third or fourth liner. So he's one of those, I'll use a baseball terminology or use baseball term. He's a 4A player. He was too good to be in the American Hockey League and not good enough and didn't have the well-rounded game to be in the NHL. So the KHL, which is not as good as the NHL and maybe is a little better than the American Hockey League, might be a perfect fit for him. And I really don't see an NHL team giving him another opportunity. If there's expansion in the next couple of years, then maybe he gets another shot. But in a 32-team league, as a 31-year-old and maybe a 32-year-old next year, I don't see anybody taking a shot at him.
All right. Well, let's go to junior hockey now, because Michael Misa has had a remarkable season with the Saginaw Spirit in the OHL. He's now tied with John Tavares for the fourth most points in an OHL season since 2000. So he's got 134. And his 62 goals on the year tie him with Patrick Kane for the third most by a draft-eligible player in OHL history. So we've seen several names float around in the draft projections for this year. Misa has been among them, among other guys like James Higgins, Schaefer, Porter Martone. Looking at all these names, do you think that Misa has secured himself as a top 3 pick in the draft this year?
I don't think it's guaranteed, because the only thing that seems to be definite is that Schaefer will be the number 1. But I also think that that's a little bit in doubt, because if a team like Buffalo wins the lottery after taking Owen Power and Rasmus Dahlin first overall in 2018 and 2021, I think the last thing they're going to do is take another defenseman first overall. So I'm not saying they're all the same. I don't have the knowledge base of the prospects like someone like Russ Cohen, who I talk with all the time about prospects. I think Misa is going to be a top 3 pick. It's the question. The question with him is, do NHL scouts and NHL general managers believe he's a center, because he's played wing and center? If they think he projects as a center, then he could get picked as high as 2nd overall. If they think he may slot in as a winger, then I think he'll be definitely top 5. But they'll maybe. I think Higgins is definitely a center at the NHL level, so I think that would put him ahead of Misa. But I mean, I don't think a team getting him is going to really be, disappointed, because he seems to be a great talent.
Yeah, I would agree on Higgins, especially with him being a center. Then it really does kind of depend on how Misa projects. But he's been, of course, he's had an incredible year, and like you said, I don't think any NHL team is going to be mad if they end up with him in the draft this year. All right, wrapping up today, the Columbus Blue Jackets have been sort of the feel-good story of the NHL this year, but they have lost 6 games in a row at a very critical point in the season. So they are slowly slipping out of reach of a playoff spot in the East, which is still pretty wide open at this point. What's been the biggest reason that things have fallen apart for the Blue Jackets lately? Obviously, they've had injuries on their roster, but they're getting a couple guys back from IR here with the last few games remaining. But, what else has been sort of the biggest issue for them, and can they get things back on track?
I mean, if you look at the last 6 games, it yells and screams at you. It's goal scoring. They've scored 7 goals in 6 games. They've been shut out 3 times. That right there. I mean, now they're getting Sean Monahan back, and maybe that gives them a jump start. But I mean, they need to score goals, and especially if they're battling Montreal and Ottawa and the teams that they're the Rangers and the Islanders. I mean, it's really, they're only 4 points out of a playoff spot, so it's not completely impossible that they turn it around, but they're going to have to turn around this trend. And I looked at Columbus, and I thought the thing that would keep them from making the playoffs was their goaltending. But their offense had been really had been pretty consistent this year, but in the last couple weeks it's just dried up, and sometimes when it dries up, it's tough to get it back.
It's a tough time in the year to fall victim to that bad puck luck. It's not like they're getting dramatically outshot by their opponents either. Or outchanced. They actually outshot the Devils last week 46-20, but they still lost. And so it's just that a bad time of year to have the offense dry up. Like you said, defense hasn't been great either. They at one point, it's been a little bit better the last couple games, but when you're giving up 4 or 5 goals a game and you're not producing any offense, then that's pretty much going to put the nail in the coffin for you on this season. But as you mentioned, Sean Monahan coming back, Eric Goodbranson also coming back from IR for the last 13 or so games of the season. So still a team that bears watching. We'll see if they can get it done and maybe make the playoffs. But for now, that is going to do it for this week's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you again, Michael, as always, for joining me today. Thank you again to Stix.com for sponsoring. We will be back with an all new episode on Thursday. We'll see you then.